the the initial search that we went through, we were able to. I was able to contact a man who had taken down the Hammond Mill up in Arcata, just out of Arcata, and got these huge timbers, redwood timbers. They were 41 feet long, 12 inches by 16 inches, that we milled really all the redwood framing for this building out of, as well as the gatehouse, and it was quite an amazing find. And the wood, the Hammond Mill was built in the late 1800s, and of very high quality redwood. But the design of it, the original idea for the main house revolved around the idea of 2 studios, one for Kate and one for Earl, who was her husband at the time. And this started in, I think, probably about 74, maybe, roughly.
What were they each doing in their studios?
Well, the idea was that they would, Kate's studio was downstairs, and Earl's was to be this bridge house that's here now, and they would meet in the middle.
I mean, was she doing music in her studio?
Music, yeah, was her main focus, certainly. And so the idea was, for the general layout came from that. You know, we wanted to not invade the hillside, so the buildings were perched near, right on the meadow, basically, at the edge of the meadow, not taking up the meadow. And that was, the concept then evolved from there, and the interior of this building was rather different when it was designed originally, when we started, and the evolution of it allowed, it was a 2-year process, and it changed as we went. Both Kate and I, you know, would discuss it. She was really quite an amazing person to work with. She was very positive, and yet she definitely had ideas, and the kind of, I mean, the influences here, I definitely am very influenced by traditional building of various sorts, particularly the cultures that have used wood for centuries, Japanese as well as European. The Norwegian tradition is quite deep. In fact, all of Northern Europe, very, very much, and that can be seen in this building, though it's not traditional in the construction technique at all. But she was very interested in Japanese architecture, and that influence came in as we worked, and very, I think, very nicely. It affected my whole outlook as well. So there was a real fusion of in working with Kate. I grew quite a bit in the process with her influence. So this building took about took about 2 years, and we decided Earl had exited the scene by the time that we were building this, and so that studio was deferred and didn't actually get started until I think about '94. So this construction here I think finished around 1980. Between 78 and 80 we were building, and there were a variety of people involved in the construction, most of them carpenters and boat builders, local Bolinas folks. Len Coleman was sort of the lead at that time, and quite a quirky guy, very, very talented. And I could put him onto a project, and he could do anything. This fireplace is cast in one piece in concrete, and he built the forms for it. So he had to think about the form of it and build it inside out. And there's a funny story around it. To get a good, reasonably good surface on the concrete, it requires a lot of compacting, and there's an electric prod that you put in the concrete that sort of jiggles it and gets the air bubbles out. And at one point, we were in the middle of the pour, and that prod got stuck in the rebars down in there, and it was quite a scene. We had to. It took, I don't know, it seemed like forever to extricate it, but it finally happened, and then we could move on and do the upper part of it.
Does this relate to any country's tradition,
Any what?
country's tradition, or is that just a completely unique fireplace?
This is pretty unique. It's essentially a foundation for the roof. Holds up the roof. And I would say the influence is probably the closest traceable influences would be Bernard Maybach, who did massive concrete fireplaces, and beautifully so. And at the time, I was working on my master's thesis at Berkeley, and was studying the Bay Area tradition, and got very interested in Maybach.
I could see it as soon as you were here. I thought, oh, because this reminds me of the church in Berkeley.
A little bit of that.
And when I was a student, I would go to that church because it was so beautiful. And now that I've traveled, I can see that there's the influences of all these different countries in that one piece.
Yeah.
And this house feels that way too.
There is a lot of influence, and Maybach, I don't know how many of you know the name, but he was in Berkeley, and he had a long career from probably the teens up into the 50s and beyond, actually.
Tuolumne Lodge, no?
What's that?
Tuolumne Lodge fireplace in Yosemite.
Yosemite, that wasn't done by Maybach, but yeah, that's a monumental.
Yeah.
That's a
piece for
fireplace.
sure. Yeah, the Awana Lodge. Yeah, national park architecture is quite wonderful
I have a
stuff.
question. Did Art Carpenter have do any of the woodwork in this house? Art Carpenter?
The chairs.
He did the chairs, yeah.
Small chairs.
That in the kitchen,
Okay.
I believe.
Speaking of the kitchen, can you pinpoint your inspiration for that genius spot down there, just for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? It's
This
just
is one of his pieces. I'm sorry.
so
Oh.
Yeah. Now, say again, Bill?
Can you pinpoint your inspiration for this beautiful nook down here?
Well, that was developmental, actually. Again, like a lot of things here. The loft developed while we were, building, basically. The kitchen was a bit more closed off originally, and once we started created the space, we both realized that it should be very open. And so, it got pared back, and there was a need to have a place that someone could sleep, and so that's where the loft evolved, yeah, Bill will, yeah, there he is. And it's just cantilevered off this one element, yeah, this developed as well. This trestle lighting was all. There was time to do this, and Kate had the. I mean, she was so much about the arts, and she just a beautiful. So interested in making a beautiful place, and so it was such a joy to work with her on that. And the people, this piece here, this Japanesque event was done by Dave Whalen, who's was a very good friend at the time and an excellent carpenter. That was his contribution. I mean, I designed it, but he built it, and we collaborated really on the details and the wood and so forth. So just looking around, I mean, it's it's quite so many people involved, and the bay. I think the original bay was square, and so the flares were done to open it up at a point. Just a lot of things. The whole seating was designed around that table. I can't remember who did the table. I don't think it was Art, but a local craftsman did the table.
Tom D'Onofrio.
Yeah, Tom.
D'Onofrio, that's it. Tom D'Onofrio, yep.
I have a question. Did you actually pour the fireplace right there?
Right there.
Yeah. So it was done before maybe the beams were up? I mean the whatever you call them. The sides were up, but it wasn't closed in?
Yes.
I don't mean the sides, the
It
studs.
was, because this piece, and this is what I was remembering, we held this piece off, and we, on the form, and we poured the lower part from here, and then that's where the vibrator got stuck in here, and we couldn't get it out. Finally got it out, put this piece on, and then we had to pour